Welcome everybody to our webinar today on HITRUST. My name is Siobhan Carroll and I'll be your host. Thank you all for joining us. For those of you who don't know, Intraprise Health is a healthcare focused cybersecurity firm. We're one of the longest tenured certified HITRUST assessors with extensive experience with the NIST cybersecurity framework. We provide security, privacy, HIPAA compliance, and HITRUST services. We also have a third-party risk management software product, which is called Blueprint Protect, which is based on the NIST risk management framework. Today's webinar will focus on HITRUST, and it will take about 45 minutes. This will be an interactive webinar, we hope, so please submit your questions through the questions box on your control screen, and we'll answer them throughout the webinar. If you sent your question ahead of time, we have it, and we'll answer it during the webinar. We've also created a couple of polls to help guide the conversation, so please help us out, answer them when they pop up. It shouldn't take more than 20 seconds for each poll. We have a couple of quick webinar tips. Throughout the webinar, we'll keep all lines muted to prevent background sounds. After today's session, you'll receive an email from us, and if you're interested in a copy of the slide, please let us know. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Ryan Patrick is Intraprise Health's Senior Vice President of Security Services. Ryan has over 20 years of healthcare IT and security experience across multiple security frameworks. A cybersecurity expert, Ryan brings an innovative perspective to protecting information and organizational resources. Ryan has been a battalion commander at the United States Army Reserve since April 2017. His previous military assignments include serving as Global Enterprise Operations Center Team Chief for U.S. Special Operations, Chief Information Officer of the 42nd Infantry Division within the New York Army National Guard, and Deputy Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Officer of FEMA Region 2 Homeland Response Force. Melissa Regan has been a member of the Intraprise Health team since the beginning. She has been a certified CSF practitioner for more than 3 years, and serves as one of Intraprise Health's certified quality assurance practitioners. Her whole career has been dedicated to helping healthcare organizations improve their information security programs through the adoption of the HITRUST CSF. With that, I will let Ryan and Melissa get started.
Thanks, Siobhan. So for everybody who's looking at the slides, quick poll question out there to kind of set the tone for the presentation. Really what we're looking for is how familiar are you with HITRUST? Completely unfamiliar means you can barely spell HITRUST. Familiar means that you've done some homework. You have a good sense of the benefits or what it takes to get it done. Seasoned professional means you've gone through the process maybe in your organization that you're now or in previous organizations, and you're looking to ask very specific questions. So if you could get those poll questions answered, it'd be really, really helpful for us to make sure that the audience and the message that we're delivering match. One thing that I really want to hopefully drive home during this is, we've done a lot of these HITRUST Essentials webinars in the past, and what normally happens is, myself and Melissa or another teammate will go through kind of what it takes to get through HITRUST, what HITRUST is, and there's always a bunch of questions at the end, and we may or may not, based on the amount of time allotted, we may not be able to get through all those questions. So we're changing the format here, where we want you all out there in the audience to be asking your questions either that you already have in your mind, or as we're presenting some information, get them into the question box, get them to us, because we really want to make this more of a Q&A than anything else, make it really collaborative, as if we were sitting in a room together and this was a real HITRUST seminar. That's why we have our cameras up. That's why we're trying to make this as collaborative as possible. So do not be afraid to ask silly questions. Don't be afraid to ask challenging questions. If we don't have the answer, I can promise you we will get it written down and I will get you an answer personally. So do not pull any punches. Please get those questions in. So based on the poll results, we have about a 63% ratio of folks that are familiar. So that's good. So we're starting with a certain base. And what we're going to try to do today is start off with just some general, guide rails or guardrails on what HITRUST is, some of the benefits, and what it takes to get through the HITRUST journey, just to start with, so we can all kind of level set our understanding across the board. So you're going to see up on the slide, there's a list of different benefits, and I'm not going to read those to you. Really, the point that I want to drive home is that HITRUST is unlike other frameworks, and it's unlike other security tools in the fact that there's genius behind it, in the sense of it kind of forces you, once you decide to go down the path, it kind of forces you to think about it every single day. And that may seem a little daunting. If you're just getting started, why do I want to think about a security and privacy framework every single day? But it's really about developing a culture where that becomes natural. And that's one of the biggest benefits, at least in my opinion, of HITRUST is through the process of getting certified, there's this paradigm shift that happens inside an organization where seemingly people who would never think about security and privacy are suddenly thinking about security and privacy. And oh, by the way, they're thinking about how their day-to-day actions and or decisions could potentially impact the certification that you all have worked so hard to attain. So that's one of the biggest benefits, at least in my opinion, of HITRUST. The other big benefit is you can utilize the work that you do for HITRUST to satisfy a lot of other requirements. So that the tagline that the HITRUST Alliance uses, and for those of you who may not be familiar, HITRUST Alliance is the governing body for the certification, and they're the ones that put out the framework. Their tagline is assess once, report many. So if you find yourself being inundated from business partners and outside entities asking you about your security and privacy program, you're able to leverage the HITRUST report that comes out of the certification process to send that to them and say, hey, this is what we have in place. This is all the things we're doing well. If you have any questions, look here. So it alleviates the hundreds of spreadsheets that you're getting, or Word documents, or whatever format they're coming in. You don't have to do those individually anymore. HITRUST has become so widely known that it's actually growing outside of healthcare, which is what it was originally born into. So a lot of organizations in a lot of different industries are willing to accept that report in lieu of their own report, because truthfully, it's a bit more comprehensive than filling out a spreadsheet or filling out a Word document, when typically, at least when I was doing security work for a healthcare organization, I just went through and was like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. The HITRUST report is actually going to contain detail. So there's a huge benefit for you all if you're being inundated with those continuous questionnaires, where you can just use the HITRUST report to get through that. So if we can go to the next slide, Melissa, just want to really quickly touch on the overall kind of certification life cycle and what it takes to get through HITRUST and maintain it. So the slide that you're seeing up on the screen is actually Intraprise's take on how to get certified, and then the life cycle after that. But the bottom line is that scoping is the first step. You got to understand what's being assessed. Then you're going to do what's called a readiness assessment. And really, this readiness assessment is just a benchmarking of your organization against the HITRUST CSF, which is the CSF is basically a laundry list of different requirements, aka controls, that you have to demonstrate your compliance to. So that readiness assessment gets completed. You are then required to send that assessment to a third-party assessor like Intraprise, so they can validate that the work that you said is being done from a security and privacy perspective is actually being done. Once that validated assessment, which we have labeled here as phase 4, is completed, then that gets submitted to HITRUST, and HITRUST does a review of that assessment and either grants you a certification, which we'll get into the metrics or the requirements to get certified later in the presentation, or you do not, and you get what's called a validated assessment. once you get certified, you have 12 months to continue to improve your program, and then you're required to come back to a third-party assessor like Intraprise to do what's called an interim assessment. Now, the interim is really kind of a check on learning in HITRUST eyes. They want you to maintain the work that you're doing to demonstrate compliance to the CSF. So that 12-month mark is where me or my team will come in and verify that there's been meaningful use, or not meaningful use, but meaningful progress on you correcting anything that was identified as a deficiency or gap, the fact that you have maintained all the controls you said were in place. So that happens at the 12-month mark. If Intraprise comes in, does that work, we say, yes, this organization should maintain their certification, you get another 12 months. At the end of that 12 months, which is 24 months from your original certification date, you actually have to go through, and you see at the bottom of the slide, a recertification. So this is a complete redo of the initial certification process. Now, it's not, from a labor perspective, it's not going to be as intensive because you've already been through it, unless you've made dramatic changes in your environment and the systems that are in scope. It's mostly just going to be a refresh of the evidence and the artifacts that we need to check to verify that the things are in place. If that's A-OK, then we submit it again to HITRUST and you get recertified, and the cycle just continues. So I'm going to pause there for a second. I want to see if there's any questions that may have come in on anything that I checked. If not, I'm going to pass it over to Melissa, and she's going to get into a little more of the details around scoring and the way that the assessments are set up and such.
We did have a question about scoping and level of effort. So maybe, Melissa, is that something you're going to cover on your piece there?
Sure. Yeah. Should we skip to that, Ryan, or do you want to go through the background first?
Well, since somebody asked the question, we can jump into kind of scoping and you know, what it takes and why it's important.
Sure. So scoping is the most important, part of the life cycle, because it is what defines the edges of the assessment. So if we don't take the time to really understand your environment, what your systems are, the types of users that are going to use the systems, and the boundaries of that, it can create kind of a messy assessment as we move through. So sometimes we see, people might want to, rush through the first part. And if we do that, then when we get to the readiness assessment, it gets very confusing. Our assessors need to assess, pieces of evidence for each of the systems in scope. And, if things aren't consolidated into, one test, then there's going to need to be multiple tests. So if those items aren't, talked about and scoped first, the rest of the assessment can get very confusing, and it can create rework because we'll have to go backwards and redefine scope and, work with your team again to kind of refine it and then move forward with the readiness again.
Yeah, and the one thing that I'll add is, we take scoping as the single most important phase of the entire project. To Melissa's point, if we don't get it right up front, it's going to cause a lot of pain really for everybody involved. Because if you get from phase one, which we have defined as scoping, at the end of phase three, you've done who knows how much remediation work to close the gaps in your program to be able to get certified. And suddenly we realize, oh no, the main reason why we wanted to get HITRUST certified is not in scope. Now we've got to go all the way back to the beginning. In theory, that could be 9 months ago and hundreds of hours worth of work to make sure that we are able to capture and demonstrate compliance for the assessment. So we take scoping, and I'm going to hammer this home, as the most important aspect, because we need to get it right up front. A lot of folks, a lot of organizations that we work with are on very strict timelines. So we would rather take the extra time up front, get it right, and exactly what it needs to be for your organization and the reasons why you're getting HITRUST certified. That way, it saves work on the back end.
And also, not just scoping the system, but scoping the assessment is really important. HITRUST goes through this, factors phase where we look at, the types of elements and risk factors that your organization has, and we actually scope your assessment down to the risk factors that you have. So the more risk an organization has, the more requirements you'll have. So it also affects the work effort, of actually implementing controls. So, it's really important for us to spend the time and dig deep on, those factors instead of, waiting, and you may have increased your work effort substantially, actually.
So
I actually think that's
I was going to say exactly where you're going. You want to talk about, kind of let's paint a picture a little bit of what the assessments look like?
Yeah, and I think that the scoping actually sets the stage pretty well. So you can see on the slide that the MyCSF contains a superset of about 1,900 requirements. And that scoping phase that we were talking about with the factors, that's what scales down those requirements that fit to your organization's need and your risk level. So, generally we'll usually see assessments around 350 requirements, which is a lot more manageable than 1,900 requirements. So once that's all scoped down into your assessment, those, say, 350 requirements are then split up into the 19 domains. So if you look at those domains, you'll see that some of them are technical, like network or transmission, but others are a little bit more organizational, like education, awareness, and training, physical, environmental protection. So it really covers all of your bases, and it's not just technical requirements. It covers the entire program. So, and then when you're looking at each of these requirements, there's different evaluation criteria for each requirement. So you'll see here that there's 5. There's policy, procedure, implemented, measured, and managed. And so the policy, what we look for is, we're looking, does your organization have a formal policy in place, something formally written and approved by management that everyone has access to? It should have strong language like shall or will, and it just should be circulated throughout the organization so everyone knows what you deem important in your security program. And then we're going to be looking at procedure. So based on those policies, do you have a procedure that explains how you as an organization are going to perform that control? Do you explain who, does what, and when? Those are kind of the 3 W's that we look at. And is the process repeatable? Can someone just come into the organization, take a procedure, and perform that procedure? The third is implemented. So we're going to be looking that you have the policy and the procedure, and then that procedure is implemented so that there's some evidence that what you say you're doing is actually being done. And so this might be in the form of, a screenshot, might be in the form of, an interview, or we may ask you to pull some samples. So that's how we'd be evaluating the implemented evidence. The fourth is measured. So do you utilize any sort of reporting metrics that will show whether or not a control is, passing or failing? I see this most in, education. I think the easiest example is, when you tell users that they need to go through training, do you run a report that says who actually went through training or who still needs to follow up? And then manage is that follow-up. So if you were to run the report and see that, 3 people didn't do training, is someone going then and following up with them and making sure that they're following through? And so for Intraprise Health, we recommend focusing on the first 3 maturity levels because you can, be HITRUST certified focusing on only those 3. Measured and managed tends to be a little bit more mature. So we usually recommend starting out with the kind of basics.
Yeah, the one thing that I'll add there is there really is an art, the science of this assessment, and really the adoption of this framework So as Melissa mentioned, there's 5 levels of maturity that you have to demonstrate your compliance to. Getting to the managed level really demonstrates a very high level of maturity for an organization. Not everybody is there, but that doesn't mean you can't demonstrate your level of maturity and get certified at the same time. So that's why we recommend that first-time certifiers focus on the first 3 levels of maturity because, and Melissa's going to show you the scoring here in a bit, not all 5 levels are weighted equally, and you can actually get to a passing state just by focusing on those first 3 levels of maturity, and then work towards the 4th and the 5th in future iterations of this certification. So keep in mind that this is very much a science, but there's a lot of art to getting through this process and really adopting and forming that culture that you need where people are thinking about it every single day.
There's a question about the baseline we were just talking about. Does HITRUST have a defined baseline, and how would you ensure that the baseline is not affected during the scoping?
So I want to make an assumption here. When we're talking about baseline, we may be talking about like a system baseline, where every server is built this way or every endpoint is built that way. When I was talking about a baseline, I was talking about a baseline of your program, your security and privacy program, and getting an idea of where it currently stands. So HITRUST doesn't specifically issue a baseline of where your organization should stand. Again, the genius of the HITRUST framework is it's pretty flexible, it's pretty scalable. So you are able to be at different levels of maturity, understanding that not everybody's going to be 100% secure at all times, and your environment's going to be very dynamic. There is flexibility and scalability built into the CSF and the methodology for assessing the CSF compliance that allows your baseline to really be wherever it is and then work to improve it.
Okay, there's a couple more questions on this. One of them is policy. I think, does policy include policy and standards really, so that we can reference standards as well as policy? And how about contracts? Do they count as policy?
So Melissa, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on this, but I'll start off. So when we look at policy, whether it's policy, process, standards, guidelines, we have the latitude as a third-party assessor to kind of make decisions within the assessment. So if you have a statement in your standard that demonstrates that management assertion that Melissa mentioned, the must, shall, or will, and it doesn't live in your formal policy, we can still use that to satisfy whether it's a policy or process, as long as it kind of meets the baseline assumption that the organization must follow this if it's a policy. It outlines what someone has to do in order to fulfill or execute the policy if it's focused on process. So there's definitely some flexibility there that we're given. We're given a little, I mentioned already, latitude by the HITRUST Alliance to make decisions where everybody isn't cookie cutter. We don't have to have cookie cutter answers for every single organization. Everybody must fit this box, right? Because not everybody fits into a box. And again, that's the genius of HITRUST, is that it gives you that freedom. It gives you that flexibility. It really scales, and everybody on the spectrum could adopt HITRUST, whether you're a one-person shop to multi-billion dollars. We've seen them all. There is that ability to do so.
Yeah, and going off of that, Ryan, HITRUST wants you to look at the controls and to, incorporate them into your documents, but they don't want you to copy and paste their controls into your documents. So they're not expecting that when you have your policy that they should be verbatim, word for word of, the HITRUST CSF. It should, be adopted in a way that makes sense for your organization. And to the question about the contract, just without seeing, the contract, I would say that a contract generally wouldn't be considered a policy because it needs to be something that is kind of internal, distributed throughout your organization that sets, your standards to the organization. I think that we would be, open to seeing the contract and reviewing it as part of an assessment. And, we could give you kind of more feedback if we were to review it.
Yeah, and on that specific topic, as you saw in Melissa's previous slide, there's 19 domains. And there's a possibility of up over 1,900 requirements that will fall within all those domains. There's going to be a lot of requirements that are going to ask for very specific things, to include contract language, where the template for the contract language becomes evident. And then in other requirements, the executed contract becomes evidence. So HITRUST is really going to touch your entire organization. Everybody's going to get involved in some way, shape, or form. And it's really hard for us, without looking at the details, to give you a hard and fast rule on whether something is admissible or not admissible, because it all matters within the context of your organization, the systems that are in scope, and your assessment specifically.
We should probably move along to the next one. We have a couple about, what it takes to get certified and the cost, but I know we can kind of move along. We can answer those, I think, as we're going through.
Sure. So as Ryan was talking about with the 5 maturity levels, the reason why we suggest that you focus on the first 3 is because you can see that the weight here is very skewed. So you'll see that weighted at 40% is implemented. So that's a majority of the assessment, is just, us being able to test and validate that you have implemented the controls. Policy and process, 15 and 20 respectively, they're very important for an organization to have policies and procedures written. So, they make up a good amount of weight for the score as well. But really the main focus is implemented, and then measured and managed has, lower weights there, measured at 10%, managed at 15%. So when, the first time going through, it's really important that you get your basics, the policy process, and implemented, and you can, be HITRUST certified with that. And then on the lower left-hand side, these are just the ways that we score. We get a lot of questions sometimes about scoring with HITRUST and, how we score. So there's only 5 different scores that we can give for each maturity level, ranging from 0 going up to 100 in increments of 25%. So, you can't score at a 15% on something. It's either, 0 or 25. And then, there's a scoring rubric that we follow and that, you can follow as well, that can help you, determine what score is most appropriate.
Yeah, and Melissa, if I can jump in real quick. So that scoring rubric that Melissa mentioned, this is all publicly available. This is not something where you have to guess. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a little bit of subjectivity, like any audit with the auditors. Our assessors, they're going to assess your compliance against the requirement and the items within the requirement based on the scoring rubric that's publicly available. So that's how we make determinations on whether it's non-compliant versus somewhat versus fully compliant. So that conversation happens very naturally during the assessment process between the assessor and the assessed organization. But I do want to point out, that red box on the slide, this again is the art, and it becomes based on the science, which is basically a math equation. And Melissa's going to talk to us on the next slide about what does it take to get certified, because you don't have to hit 100% on all 5, or in this case, 3 levels of maturity to get certified. So we are able to make decisions and prioritize your efforts to get to a certifying state without having to fix every single thing. This is, and I haven't said it yet, and I'm kind of surprised because it's kind of my thing. This is a significant emotional event. getting HITRUST certified is no small undertaking. But I can tell you that at the end of this significant emotional event, one, you're going to have a party because it's a significant emotional event. But two, you're going to be able to articulate the journey that you've made, and you're going to be able to tangibly demonstrate the progress that has been made. And then you'll be able to focus on taking that maturity level to the next level, if you will. So Melissa, do you want to jump into the scoring, and then we can jump into some more questions along based on what Siobhan was mentioning?
Yep. So there's two different ways or two different scores to meet in order to be HITRUST certified. So there's the first way, which is to pass and be certified without any corrective action plans. And to do that, every single domain, every one of the 19 domains, must score at a 71% or higher. So that is pretty much getting hundreds across the board on the first three maturity levels, with maybe some of them hitting 75 or 50. It's doable. We don't normally see that organizations are certified without corrective action plans. The second way is to be certified with a corrective action plan. And so to do that, each domain needs to score a 62 or higher. So that gives you a kind of a little bit more wiggle room to prioritize, if you have to implement, 10 different controls. You can kind of prioritize what is most important to your organization and what you might say is something that you want to, work on in the next year before the interim. And what it means with a corrective action plan, so first off, whether you have corrective action plans or not, you are certified. If you get to this point and you score 62 or higher, you're HITRUST certified. You can put the logo on your website. It's the full thing. It's not provisional. It's the full thing. The only difference is that when you have corrective action plans to provide, you have to provide HITRUST with, a plan of how you're going to remediate those controls that they call out. And so, what that means, and we always provide assistance, is, just kind of step by step, what are you planning to do? And that's kind of part of the evaluation criteria that HITRUST uses, and we use as well when looking at your interim assessment. We'll see how much progress did you make on your CAPS based on, what you said you're going to do.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, and then Siobhan, I think we have a couple questions, is just as a point of clarity, you do not have to get a 71 or in the second scenario, 62 on every single requirement. So it's a roll-up score at the domain level. So your domain overall has to be at either a 71 or a 62 with CAPS. I just wanted to make sure that's understood, because people, they get focused on, oh my God, this requirement, we just don't have it. It's scored at 0, it's not going to get certified. That's not the case. Again, this whole framework is very scalable, very flexible. It understands that at any given time, you may change something in your environment based on a business need that could take an individual requirement from passing to failing. That doesn't mean you absolutely lose your certification, throw the whole thing out the window.
So before we move off this, somebody had a question on passing score slide. What is the definition of domain?
That's a good question. So the domain is, and I'm just going to go back a few slides. So the domains are the domains listed here. So there are 19 of them in the assessment. And basically what it is just, it's a category. It's, a category in which HITRUST splits up requirements. So, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, if you had 350 requirements, they'll sort them by which domain, it best fits in. So, your information security program domain may have 10 requirements in there, and the endpoint may have 2. So it's just, it's a way for us to kind of divide up the assessment into kind of manageable pieces.
Yeah, and the idea behind the 19 domains, HITRUST categorize those requirements, again, AKA controls, things that need to be in place within your environment. They categorize them into work efforts in the sense of these controls are so alike, i.e. Domain 5 is about wireless. Instead of sprinkling wireless controls throughout this massive assessment, they said, okay, hey, wireless admin, here are your controls that Domain 5 to focus on. So it's about kind of piecing out the different requirements as they relate to teams within your organization.
Do we have a poll question coming up, or?
Yep.
I think we actually,
Yeah, I think we kind of did this one.
Already. Someone asked the question to beat us to the punch.
Yeah, so move that along.
You can go to the next slide. So we wanted to touch on here is we had a question come in beforehand around work effort and level of effort, and do I need to hire somebody to do high trust work? And the answer on the last part of that question is no, right? So we've talked about high trust touches every aspect of the organization. You're gonna ask your HR person questions. You're gonna be asking your facilities person questions. You're gonna be asking your network admin, your sysadmin, your security admin, all the technology, the IT related functions. But your legal team is gonna get involved. Finance is gonna get involved. So the work effort really depends on the level of maturity of your organization. So if you're on the lower end of maturity, then obviously the work effort's going to be a little bit higher to get to those passing scores. If your organization is relatively mature, the level of effort may not be as much as obviously someone who may not be as mature. What we suggest is there be kind of one throat to choke, using an Army term, on your end, someone who's your champion, your high trust champion in your organization. And what I personally would recommend is this person needs to be able to influence the organization. They need to be able to motivate key stakeholders, and they need to be able to make decisions. So if you take an intern, some kid who's still in college or just out of college, and you make them your high trust champion, who's really going to listen to that person? I mean, maybe they're really dynamic. I don't want to discredit them, but the point being is that there needs to be somebody in your organization that is pushing, because as I mentioned, this is a significant emotional event. Nobody's job is high trust compliance in your organization. So this is an extra duty, an extra hat that someone and everyone in the organization is going to wear, because we want everybody to adopt it. This needs to become a part of the culture. So if you're looking at the slide, on the left half of the slide is what typically structures their team to look like. The right side of the slide is what we recommend there be in the new organization. Again, that project manager, another term for that is champion, as I mentioned it. If that person needs to be able to talk to everybody else you see below them. They don't need to manage them. They just need to be able to kind of be the funnel of information. So we give you a project manager. You have somebody who is the champion on your end, and that becomes the conduit. So I guess my long-winded answer is we don't need to hire somebody just to do high trust work. In fact, you don't want one person doing high trust work, because from the time you get certified to your interim to your recertification, people are going to be making decisions. They're going to change the way they do business, because the way we do business is very dynamic. Contract templates may change. IT environments may change. You may change facilities. If there's only one person who's really focused on high trust, are the people who are making decisions for all the other things actually thinking about it, making sure it's in compliance to the CSF so you can maintain your certification? The answer is likely no. So this person just needs to kind of herd the cats. So I'll pause there. Melissa, any further comments, any questions from the audience?
No, I agree completely. Just having someone who's going to kind of take lead is really important.
We do have a couple of questions along. One is a small nonprofit health company. The most pressing question is, how can small companies get HITRUST certified? And then another one, and then other ones are about the NIST RMF and taking care, and also third-party call centers who don't control where the information is held. So I think we're going to cover some of that. So just wanted to keep you guys on that.
Yeah, so as far as smaller organizations, I'll touch on that real quick. One of my favorite stories to tell is Intraprise worked with a two-person shop, a husband and a wife. They were it for the entire organization. We were able to work with them and get them certified. And for me, that's the case study to show that HITRUST really is scalable to any organization. So you don't need unlimited resources. You don't need, tons of people in your organization to get HITRUST certified. From a cost perspective, HITRUST actually offers something they call their Right Start program. The Right Start program is, think of it as like a bundle of services or a bundle of products. So in order to get certified, there's access to a web application called MyCSF, which is proprietary to the HITRUST Alliance. That's where all the work is done. And that's where you're going to submit your assessment for certification, both to the third-party assessor and then ultimately down the line to the HITRUST Alliance. As you can imagine, there's a cost to that, a licensing cost. Additionally, there's training opportunities available to learn more about HITRUST in a more formal manner at the HITRUST Alliance in Frisco, Texas. That's the Certified CSF Practitioners course and there's a few others. The Right Start program actually will bundle the licensing fee and the training fees together at a reduced price so they become more affordable to smaller organizations. I don't have all the answers on that because HITRUST prefers that you talk to them directly about that stuff, but I can tell you that the feedback that I've seen is that the Right Start program is beneficial to smaller organizations, but there's criteria. I think it's you have to have less than 50 employees. There's a revenue cap. If you make over a certain amount of revenue, then you don't qualify. So your eligibility for that program, I would talk directly to the HITRUST Alliance.
Okay, so just in terms of time, we're running down, but we have questions about the third-party call center who works with healthcare providers tunneling into their software, don't hold the data. Do we need or have the option to become HITRUST certified? We have a question about the difference between HITRUST and SOC 2. And then the other one is that it's possible to leverage NIST RMF for HITRUST. So I don't know if that kind of gives you some focus for the next couple of minutes.
It does, but I've had too many head injuries, so you're going to have to remind me of all the questions as we go through them.
Okay.
So we did receive a question before the presentation about cloud providers and, how do we work with cloud providers and things, and I think that directly relates to the question about call centers and things like that. So HITRUST actually has a mechanism, they have two mechanisms, in fact, where you can still get certified even though you may not directly manage the data in the systems in scope. So the first mechanism is called their inheritance program. So if your call center provider, specific to the question, or your cloud provider, specific to the previous question, if they've previously been HITRUST certified, there's a mechanism in that web-based portal, MyCSF, that I mentioned, where you can request that you just inherit all the controls that they manage. Meaning, if it's a data center, you're up in the cloud, obviously AWS, Azure, Rackspace, NextGen, all these major providers, they are the ones managing the physical security of that data and the devices and information systems that's being housed in their cloud. So you don't have direct control over that. For the underlying network infrastructure that supports you being able to access said cloud or call center. The idea is that if they've done the work, it's actually just a couple clicks of the button in MyCSF where you can actually pull all the information from their assessment and apply it to your assessment. So it alleviates some of the work on your behalf, and it actually sets you up to be able to get certified is if you don't have that information, you wouldn't be able to certify. Second piece is called Reliance. So if your business partner is not HITRUST certified, but they've gone through other assessments, whether it's some kind of ISO, SOC 2, PCI, maybe they've had a third party do a NIST CSF assessment against them, that report can be provided to Intraprise or a third party assessor, and you can rely on the information in that report to demonstrate that your data, your systems and scope are actually being protected in compliance with the CSF. So there is mechanisms to be able to get certified, even though you may not be in direct control of the systems and scope or where the data is and how it's being managed. So I'll pause there. Melissa, anything that you think I missed on those two?
No, that was perfect. And while you're talking, we did post the poll question about systems or services hosted in the cloud, and it looks like a significant amount of people on the line do use the cloud.
Yeah,
so that would be exactly
and that's why we really wanted to touch on this topic, is because more and more we're seeing on-prem organic data centers going out, going away. So most of our clients at this point are working with cloud providers. What was it? The second question was?
We talked about SOC 2, the difference between HITRUST and SOC 2, and then also, I don't know if you wanted to add in leveraging the NIST RMF 800-53 for HITRUST. Okay, so
I'll go to the NIST stuff first, because I think that one's a little bit quicker of a conversation. So the HITRUST CSF is actually built on a number of other frameworks. The foundation is ISO 27001, but 800-53 controls for NIST. And there's a number of other frameworks that the HITRUST Alliance has built into the CSF itself. So if you have done NIST RMF or you've implemented NIST 800-53 controls, you already are probably talking the same language as HITRUST. You're probably going to be able to demonstrate that compliance because it's built into the CSF. We can provide a list of all of the frameworks that are a part of the HITRUST CSF after this, so you can get a good idea of where you may stand based on the different frameworks that you previously worked with. Melissa, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I was just going to say they are very closely related to the point where even, from the assessor side, when we're looking at, performing tests, we use the illustrated procedures in HITRUST first, but a lot of times the secondary source for us is NIST as well. So they are very closely related, and a lot of the requirements, a good chunk of them are actually, you'll see they almost are word for word. So they're very closely related.
All right.
Okay, and then, the other one was on SOC 2. I think we talked about SOC 2, the difference between HITRUST and SOC 2.
Yeah, so just quickly touching on SOC 2 versus HITRUST. There's probably the main difference between going through SOC 2 and getting HITRUST certified is your level of assurance. And you're going to see up on the screen right now, we talk about, what's driving the demand for increased assurance. And just to take a second on what does assurance mean? When we talk about assurance through the eyes of HITRUST, we're talking about if I'm a consumer of your HITRUST certification report, or I'm a consumer of your SOC 2 report, how assured am I that what is in that report is actually implemented within your environment? And as you probably could guess, the more assurance, the more comfortable that you are that they're in place, the more likely you're going to do business, and it'll reduce your stress levels if you're a security person that they're not going to be breached, which means you've been breached, and so on and so forth. So the main difference between a SOC 2 and HITRUST is arguably HITRUST has a higher level of assurance, and I'll explain to you how that is. So when you get a SOC 2 assessment done, really there's two levels of assurance, and we could probably argue that maybe there's one or two or three, but really it's two levels. You have the management attestation that's required for a SOC 2, saying that everything that's in this report is accurate, it's true, it's implemented, all those things. Then you have the AICPA firm that is required to come in and do the actual assessment. They come in and say, yes, these things, we saw them, they're in place, so on and so forth. So those are your two levels of assurance. Whereas HITRUST, we also have a management attestation. So your senior management is going to have to sign a letter as a part of the submission saying that everything in this assessment is in place, it's accurate, it's true, it's comprehensive. The second level is that we, as a third-party assessor firm, we actually have to come in, we're required to, unbiased third party, comes in, we do a validation. So that validated assessment, that validation work that we do, we're going to test every single control at every single maturity level for all of the requirements in scope of that assessment. Once that's complete, all that information gets sent to, and I'm required to do this as the practice lead at Intraprise for HITRUST. HITRUST actually requires me to send that through an internal QA process, a completely separate team in my organization, to go through the results of that assessment and make sure that it's there, it's in place, the scores are right, the commentary is right, the evidence matches, so on and so forth. So right there we have three levels of assurance. After that's complete, we submit the assessment to HITRUST. It goes through a QA process internal to HITRUST. So they're also going to go through and check the assessment to make sure that the scores make sense, the comments make sense, it's all supported by the evidence, the scope makes sense based on what's being presented. And then after that, so that's four, after that, HITRUST has a completely separate arm within its organization, their compliance department, that actually reviews the assessment as well before it's published and certified. So you're really talking about 5 levels of assurance that the things that are being said are happening in that assessment are actually happening, compared to SOC 2's 2 levels of assurance. So if you're trying to decide on SOC 2 versus HITRUST, and I may sound biased because this is what I do, you're going to get a higher level of assurance with HITRUST, and you're going to grow with HITRUST versus SOC 2, because the SOC 2 assessment is a snapshot in time. This is where they stand, whether good, bad, or indifferent. This is where they stand. Whereas our methodology here at Intraprise is we are actually going to improve you before we ever submit you, get you certified. And oh, by the way, it goes through those 5 levels of assurance. So I'll pause there. That was a whole lot of information.
Well, actually, it's good that you paused because it's 5 of. I think we answered most questions. There was a couple that I can answer directly. I'll send an email out after this, or actually you can send an email after this, Ryan or Melissa. But I wanted to thank everybody for coming. If you are interested in setting up a free scoping call with one of our assessors, please reach out to us. You can email Pam Hayduk, which is PHAYDUK @intraprisehealth.com, and we will set something up. If you have any other questions for our presenters, please, shoot us an email. You can send it to Pam, and she'll forward it along to whoever is the best to answer it. And I really appreciate everybody staying on and taking the time to answer the questions. And thank you, Ryan and Melissa.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, Siobhan.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye.